Support for this episode comes from the University of San Francisco's SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, better known as JSSJ. The JSSJ graduate level certificate program in JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, empowers professionals with invaluable skills, tools, and resources to connect generations and ensure inclusive growth. Courses this fall include Israel-Palestine and American Jewish Life, Generational Divides and Future Directions, Race, Racism, and Jews, and Binaries and Beyond, Justice, Gender, and the Future of Jewish Traditions. Learn more and apply. Go to usfca.edu/JEDI. That's usfca.edu/JEDI. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 435, Tales of the Unbound, episode 1, Jewish Enough. I am so moved to share some exciting news with all of you. After 8 years of the Judaism Unbound podcast, it's clear that many of us are seeking a world where unbound Judaism is a way of life. Hearing the stories of teachers, students, and listeners who have built Jewish lives through the Judaism Unbound lens has proven deeply meaningful. In that spirit, we are proud to introduce the first addition to our Judaism Unbound family of podcasts today, called Tales of the Unbound. It is a long-form series that follows the stories of folks whose lives have been deeply affected by our approach to Jewish identity and praxis. In its inaugural season, over the course of 7 episodes, Tales of the Unbound follows the journey of 2 men who pursue Jewish conversion while incarcerated. The season explores themes of identity, conversion, belonging, and Jewish life behind bars. We're thrilled to periodically feature Tales of the Unbound's episodes here on our Judaism Unbound feed. But if you want to listen to the whole series right when they are first released, subscribe to Tales, that's Tales, of the Unbound, in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other favorite place where podcasts are found. You can also help share these stories of transformation broadly with your friends and family, and check the show notes for behind-the-scenes content, along with ways to help support Jewish folks who are incarcerated. Without further ado, here's our Executive Director, Miriam Turlinchamp, with Episode 1 of Tales of the Unbound.
When you are in prison, there are many choices one can make about how to belong, stay safe, and spend your time. You can find a community based on race, or workout routine, or religion. You can protect yourself with violence, nonviolence, or something in between. You can spend your time in recovery groups, education, or drug use. So it's an interesting choice to say,
I think of myself as part of Israel. When you convert, you're actually given a lineage, and it's just like, wow.
I think that many of them have found their true identity.
This is where I belong.
Finding your sense of belonging in prison amongst the Jewish people is no easy feat, especially if you weren't born Jewish and it's forbidden by Jewish normative conversion practices to convert while in prison. And yet Ari and Josh do just that. This is the story of their journey of Jewish belonging while incarcerated. Welcome to Tales of the Unbound, Episode 1, Jewish Enough. It begins with Amy, the interim executive director of University Beyond Bars, visiting a prison in Washington State about an hour from where she lives. On one of her tours, she notices a man who stands out.
I approached this young man who was wearing a kippah and kind of tongue-in-cheek said, "So what's with the kippah?" And he said, "Wait, you know that word?" And I said, "Yes, I'm one of you." He was like, "No way, get out." I said, "Yes way."
The encounter leads to a conversation about Judaism in prison.
Some of them came from families that were totally disconnected Jewishly, but then got to prison and needed to find something to hold on to. And so many people find religion, and some of them were drawn back into Judaism. And so I would say that they were kind of this ragtag group of men who gathered as often as they were able to, but they didn't have a consistent sponsor. And I approached the chaplain at Washington State Reformatory and asked if I could become the Jewish chaplain for Monroe. And he was super excited for the men and for me to be able to do that.
One of the members of that ragtag group was Ari, a muscle-bound autodidact who, while incarcerated over the last 2 decades, taught himself multiple languages, learned to paint, became the muralist for the prison, and provides the daily workout regimen for his crew. For years, the small group met for Shabbat, Sabbath worship. There were a few Jews by birth who could teach the others, but in order to share equally in the process, Ari looked for the ways to learn outside of the circle as well. He watched recorded classes from community colleges in his cell.
I saw that college professor on the Bellevue channel teaching Hebrew that I was like, wow, maybe I can take my Bible studies to the next level.
Ari read books and learned Hebrew.
When I was working in the chapel, there was actually some Hebrew books by Menachem Mansour called Biblical Hebrew Step by Step. And I learned from a book by myself. There were cassette tapes that come with the book, and I would sit there while I was working and just kind of listen to things. There was another one called Prayer Book Hebrew that had 9 CDs, and I would sit there and learn how the cantors were singing things. So by the time I met Amy years later, she was actually surprised because she goes, oh my gosh, how did you teach yourself Hebrew?
Ari helped grow the community, welcoming others in like his cellmate Josh. Josh is effervescent. You can feel his enthusiasm for life in his every word. He found himself a lifer at a young age, and yet Josh's focus over the last years has been in restorative justice, taking atonement seriously, serving on volunteer boards, and helping raise support dogs. He makes jewelry, he's written books, and he was looking for a spiritual compendium to the hard work of restorative justice.
You know, it was very interesting to them that somebody that's full of tattoos and blonde hair, blue eyes would come into this space. I did maybe seem out of place slightly, but I didn't feel like anybody was trying to push me away. I felt very embraced.
Then the COVID pandemic hit, and the men were confined to their cells and pods. Ari and Josh received tablets for education, and the world of Judaism became more accessible than ever.
So there were literally thousands of podcasts to choose from, and it was just something that I came across in the Jewish section, and I was like, oh, Judaism Unbound, this one seems cool, and I started listening to a few of the episodes. And
both Ari and Josh had little interaction with Judaism and Jewish people before prison. Ari found Judaism early on through the lens of study, while Josh found it later on through the lens of faith. In this story, we won't be making a declarative dogmatic statement about what it means to convert or be Jewish, because we agree with Ari.
You know, I love history, tradition, and rituals, but I think there's more than one way to do Jewish. There's no one right way to do anything as far as I'm concerned.
And we won't be talking about the crimes that led Josh and Ari to be incarcerated, because we agree with Amy.
From the very beginning, I never asked any of them what they did to end up in prison. Not my place, not my business, unless they want to share. And I think that's an important aspect of this sacred space, that there's no judgment that anybody is making on anyone else about the depths of the crime that they committed to land in prison.
What we're talking about here are two men seeking a place of belonging, rich in curiosity and self-reflection, finding faith and community in Judaism, and then slowly growing that circle of belonging. In terms of physical safety, there is no benefit to identify as a minority by choice in prison.
A couple of our members were both attacked in other facilities.
There are stories after stories of targeted abuse, violence, and discrimination against Jewish people in prison.
White supremacist movements are really popular in prison, and a number of the guys were moved from prisons where they were being harassed regularly because of their Jewish identity.
Why would anyone choose to be Jewish in prison?
And I can only say that I don't think that I found Judaism. I think Judaism found me.
One day, they're all working out in the yard.
there was this guy who always seemed to be around the pull-up bar and the dip bars.
And we were, of course, always hanging out together in their little trio, working out, laughing, joking, having a good time, kind of carefree. But what he didn't know was that they were Jews. All he knew was is he looked at a group of guys, and they were always laughing, joking, ribbing each other, having a wonderful time.
So he went up to them and asked, what kind of people laugh in prison?
Jews.
Jews.
That's where I need to be because that's what I want to do.
And yet they couldn't convert formally to Judaism.
There was this notion of you can't convert while incarcerated because you're not free to make those decisions. So when any of them had asked about conversion, in sort of the typical places where they would think to ask, there was always a tacit no, right? There's no such thing as conversion in prison because you can't do it freely. So in the conversation that we had with people, it was always, when I get out, I want to do this. And how do I do that when I get out? And it was like, well, we'll help you find the path when you get out.
Well, in my circumstance, I have life without parole at this moment. So what would they say about that? Where does free will come into play? And would they deny me a conversion and the opportunity to be able to practice in a meaningful way and be a part of this community simply for the sentence that I've received? I was never more free and able to make that choice freely than I was at this point in time after I'd been in the Jewish community. I had shed everything that was holding me down. Everything that was shackling me to the past was gone. I had fully rehabilitated and became a member of this community in more ways than one.
Okay, let's pause here for a moment for some context on Jewish conversion. In the Jewish tradition, conversion is supposed to be hard. It's a long process with a built-in system of turning people away and a sentiment that you can live a Jewish life without converting. In some ways, it's a really beautiful notion. We don't necessarily need more Jews. We need more people living good lives. In a religion that is this world oriented, we have little interest in saving souls for the sake of heaven. We are much more interested in the healing and hard work of justice, tikkun, in this lifetime. And for that, you just need to be a good human, not a good Jewish human. But if you want to convert, even though Judaism has no need for you to do so, there are some stipulations. 1, you must have free will. Total autonomy in body and spirit. This is likely related to historic Jewish trauma of being forcibly converted. 2, you must not benefit or gain from conversion. This is about authentic intention. You could read it as a fear of assimilation, including folks who will change Judaism unrecognizably, and also likely related to theories around chosenness and being present at Sinai. In fact, traditionally, Jews say that all Jews across time, past, present, and future, were standing at Sinai when we received the commandments, which means conversion isn't a change. It's an affirmation of your Jewish soul. 3, you must be able to observe all of the mitzvot, the commandments. It's nearly impossible to observe Shabbat according to halachic standards, Jewish law, in prison. There are wonderful support agencies who provide access to kosher food and prayer books, but many of the required mitzvot cannot be followed while incarcerated. 4, finally, there are 3 specific rituals a convert must undergo in order to fully convert to Judaism. Beit Din,
The House of Judgment.
A group of 3 rabbis who question your intentions and knowledge. In some spaces, it feels like affirmation, while in others, it can feel like a dissertation defense.
I was scared of going to the House of Judgment. I was scared of coming to the Beit Din.
Ritual circumcision,
Hatzafat Dam,
and ritual immersion in living waters.
mikveh.
But in prison,
There was no way to do the Hatzafat Dam or convene a Beit Din or do a mikveh.
these rituals have been the way to convert to Judaism since conversion was introduced. But over time, each element became increasingly more difficult. Mikveh, ritual immersion, begins as a practice in the Maccabean period, but over time it becomes more complicated with how to prepare and the requirement of witnesses. Milah, or circumcision, used to be a small incision that you could hide. But after Jews started reversing their circumcisions in order to compete in Greek athletics, the rabbis made the circumcision requirements more extreme. In the rabbinic court, the Beit Din, which is now a fairly rigorous conversation that requires over a year of study and preparation, used to be just a single question.
Don't you know that the Jews are oppressed?
That's Dan Liebenson, founder of Judaism Unbound, president of Lippman Camper Foundation for Living Torah, and co-host of the Judaism Unbound podcast. The line itself is from a chapter in the Talmud, Yevamot 47a, line 13, on the standards of conversion. It's one of the earliest documented cases of the process of conversion. Here's Lex Rofeberg, the senior Jewish educator at Judaism Unbound and co-host of the Judaism Unbound podcast, sharing the text.
A convert approaches the sages, who ask the convert, "What did you see that caused you to come to convert? Don't you know that the Jewish people, at the present time, is an anguished, suppressed, despised, harassed people, with hardships frequently visited upon them?" And then, if the convert says, "Yes, and I am unworthy," we accept them immediately.
I know. The idea that suffering is the cost of identifying as a Jew as a core identity marker is intense. It's also consistent with the way many Jewish folks see Jewish identity now, 1800 years after the codification of this text. There's this fear around what it means to declare your Jewishness, and a wonder why someone would choose to join us. There's built-in rejection, fear, and self-loathing into the process of conversion. And the I am unworthy part, that's fascinating. And uncomfortable. What's the convert unworthy of? Certainly not the suffering. Maybe that's our fantasy, that someone is so in love with Judaism that not only do they love us, they reject our rejection and self-recrimination, saying yes to beauty, to the realities, and to the unconscious insecurities that are part of Jewish identity. The sages know that there's a cost for identifying as a Jew, and that no worthwhile treasure is free. Here's Dan again in a conversation with myself and Lex Rofeberg on episode 374 of the Judaism Unbound podcast.
In the Talmud, basically, you just tell somebody a few mitzvot, a few small ones, a few big ones. And the one thing that you have to tell everybody is that we Jews take care of the poor. And that's it. And so then you just jump into the mikveh, the ritual bath, and you do a ritual immersion, and you're Jewish. And there is no conversion class. It does not have to be a year. It does not have to be a day. It just has to be a quick conversation, and then boom, you're Jewish. So this whole notion that people have that in order to become Jewish, you need to take a really big class, and maybe some people say you have to live as a Jew for a year, things like that. Those are not from the early days of the Talmud. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not authentic. I mean, they've grown up over time, but that was not the OG conversion. And if you care about the OG conversion, then there is room, we think, to do things differently.
I'll tell you, I am a West Coaster who's been transplanted to the Midwest. There's so many things I don't understand still after being here more than a decade about like how much you're allowed to talk to someone at the butter aisle in the grocery store here. And in Seattle, you would just like wear your earphones all the time and it would be fine. And that's not rude, but here it is. Like all kinds of nuances that are around acceptance. And if at the end of the day, we're not just individuals on a spiritual journey, but a group of humans trying to change our world, then we have to figure out some kind of collective metric of acceptance. And so I think that if we're going to be pushing Jews to become Jews in their one beautiful area that will bring that gift back to the Mishkan, back to like the holy altar that we're building, then we got to do a lot of insider education about gatekeeping. My biggest problem in my work is the gatekeeping and what it means to actually truly accept, and for myself too.
Maybe like a separate course is needed for, longstanding Jews to learn to not gatekeep. And what does it mean to have an orientation to Judaism where gatekeeping becomes a ridiculous thing to think about? Like somehow, How could you keep a gate? There are no gates. You're standing guard in this place where the gate used to be, but there's actually no gate. And so people can go around you and everywhere. So it becomes absurd, but maybe that's kind of what the world actually is. I'm very, very radical about conversion. Like I really profoundly don't believe that there should be any substantial requirements. I love the idea that the one concrete requirement that we see in the Talmud is that you have to tell people that Jews care for the poor. That's the one thing you need to know. And then whoever's doing it can tell you a few other things, and then that's it. And by the way, part of why I think that was true back in the time of the early days of the Talmud is because, like our time, it wasn't clear what Judaism was. Judaism was in a great period of transition. How are you going to teach somebody what Judaism is all about and what Jews believe? It's all changing. And that's exactly like our time. So the idea that we would know how to put together a course to teach you all you need to know about Judaism when Judaism itself is changing becomes kind of absurd.
This was the episode that prompted Josh and Ari to reach out to us.
I loved how you guys had talked about not doing gatekeeping and all these other things that were barriers to people from the outside, and how the OG conversion of saying a few minor mitzvot and some of the greater mitzvot, but mentioning that Jews help the poor and all that.
Sigh, gatekeeping.
As I listened, I learned about, gatekeeping shouldn't be a thing. We should embrace folks in our community and have everybody have a joyous experience that's meaningful to everybody. And hopefully we can create this loving environment that just fosters community. And I loved that.
Being locked away from who you want to be was not new for Ari and Josh.
Going into the prison, there are these very big metal doors that you go into from the outside. So you go into one, then it closes behind you, and there's one in front of you. And those doors clank shut, and it was really jarring to hear that sort of slamming of the door. And I could only think about like what that must be like for them all the time, right? Having their own cell doors closed like that 3 times a day, whatever it is for them.
Locked out, locked down, and still every week Ari and Josh pursued what they've been told was impossible.
It was a desire to affirm something that I already believed, but I just kind of wanted to announce it to the rest of the world. I had been keeping Shabbat and doing all the things for the last 15 years or so, and I just wanted to take that final step and be recognized. And over the years, I've actually tried to reach out to some of the local people, and I would get responses like, "Oh my gosh, that's so amazing, but at the moment I don't have time for a conversion student." And it's totally understandable. Rabbis are very, very busy people and underappreciated for the amount of work they do behind the scenes. But it was just kind of hard to find someone to do that.
Rabbis are being reached out to by people who don't know them and they don't know. So there's that fear factor. What am I going to get sucked into? I don't have bandwidth for this. I'm going to travel an hour or an hour and a half to go see one person for an hour. Like, what kind of benefit is that for them? Is that how I really want to spend my time?
We just never found a rabbi that would do it. I got some very nice letters back, hey, if you need a Talit or a Siddur, let me know, but I'm sorry, I don't have time for this right now. And it's no fault on them. I get it. Like, I'm in a prison and, it was just something that I was going to wait for if that were the case.
The answers that we were receiving back is that it's going to be really hard. It's going to be difficult because people say that you don't have free will. So therefore, how could you convert if you don't have free will?
And then one day,
I typed in conversion under the search function on the podcast, and your name and a couple others came up. And I listened to them, and I was like, wow, Josh, this lady seems amazing, and, you have to listen to this. And he's like,
yes, you're right. We need to reach out to her.
I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we'll see if she writes back.
So I reached out to you, Miriam, via email, and you responded, and I was absolutely enthused because it was the first response I ever had.
They found you simultaneously. And for both of them, it was this light bulb, like, wait, we can do this? We want to do this. We want to do this now.
Josh, Ari, and I talked for a few months. They wrote letters and emails. We spoke on the phone. They read every book and article I sent them, listened to as much Jewish content as they could get their hands on. They dutifully participated in Shabbat and study with Amy.
And then once they approached me and said, we found someone who is willing to help us, will you help us? I mean, in some ways it was a no-brainer. It's like, of course. Like, if you found rabbinic leadership that's willing to do this, it's fine with me. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
We spoke with the prison. I studied up on ways we could follow traditional Jewish guidelines for conversion that might work within the context of a correctional system.
So for me, reaching out to you and having you say, this is possible, where I thought it wasn't possible for me because I'm serving this sentence where they say you will die in prison. And I think there's a lot of folks inside prison that are suffering from this same thing. They are told, you are going to die in prison. There will be no relief for you. There will be no recompense. There will be no burning of a sacrifice at an altar, like we read about in Vayikra, my parshat. There will be no justification for who you are to allow you to become this person that you believe that you are. But yet, in that moment, you decided that nothing is impossible. And that resonated with me. And that's whenever I was like, holy smokes.
Holy smokes is right. And I was all in. I flew out to Seattle, drove the hour up to the prison, and began a journey of radical transformation. Where previously there had been no mikveh, no milah, no Beit Din.
Somehow you found a way to do all the above.
I stood in front of the makeshift mikveh we'd made out of collected rain and lake water, watching this community of men bear witness to their friend's transition. When you go under, when you emerge, you'll be fully a Jew. In all the ways, in every place that can recognize this, that's what you are, and you have to hold that true in yourself. So no one can take that away. When you come up, you're fully in that way. But this is our oldest tradition that you're acting right now in this place that you've made holy through your work. Okay. Got it. Touch it.
Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
May God bless you and keep you. May his countenance shine upon you, be gracious unto you, grant you peace now and forevermore. Amen.
Amen. You did it, bud. Do you know what's how?
You did the thing.
Awesome. I knew that this wasn't just the story of two men in a prison, not just about their chaplains or their community. It was also a story of my own conversion, too. The gates were open for all of us. And so we started recording our conversations so that others might walk through those open gates along with us.
Hello, this is a free call from
Joshua Phillips, Ari Kingsman,
an incarcerated individual at Monroe Corrections Complex. To accept this free call, press 1. To refuse this free call, press 2.
And we pressed 1.
You may start the conversation now.
Thanks for listening. Tales of the Unbound is a production of the Institute for the Next Jewish Future and part of the family of podcasts of Judaism Unbound. Tales of the Unbound was created and written by me, Miriam Terlinchamp, produced and edited by Joey Taylor, original music by Rich Herdinsky, art by Katie Kastner Frenchman. Thank you to Amy and Marvin and all those who serve the Jewish people, and a big shout out to Ari, Josh, and all the Jewish folks in Monroe Correctional, and all people everywhere trying their best to do good time. Special thanks to DOC at Monroe Correctional who allowed access to Ari and Josh. Check the show notes to find out ways you can get involved to support those who are incarcerated and for amazing behind-the-scenes content. We'd love to hear from you, so you can email us at miriam@judaismunbound.com or find us at www.judaismunbound.com. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will follow Amy in her journey to becoming a Jewish prison chaplain.
I guess for me, it's really about helping them to do good time. And if the values and the morals of Judaism are an underpinning for them that allow them to do that, then that's what I want to help them do. Become better people.
This has been Tales of the Unbound.